There comes a point when waiting no longer feels temporary. It stops feeling like a phase and starts feeling like a verdict. You check the timeline of your own life against the timelines of others, almost without meaning to, and something in you flinches at what you find. You watch someone your age get married, and you remember when you thought that would be you by now. You watch a former classmate get promoted into a role you once imagined for yourself. You see a stranger online, younger than you, already accomplished, already certain, already arrived somewhere you are still trying to reach. And quietly, without announcing itself, a question begins to form. Not, will it happen? But something colder. Whether it already should have happened. Whether the window has closed. Whether you were simply too slow, too afraid, too unfinished. And the world has since moved on without you. But what if the delay was not empty? What if the years that looked unproductive from the outside were actually building something you could not yet see? Not luck, not fate. Structure. The internal architecture required to hold a life you once wanted, but could not yet have carried. What if you were not late? What if you were only unready for a life you would once have destroyed, abandoned, or quietly handed back to someone else? By the end of this video, you will understand why some lives unfold later than others, how Jungian psychology explains a delay that is not failure but preparation, and why becoming ready matters more than arriving early. Let's begin with the shame, because that is where most people actually live. The shame of feeling behind rarely announces itself as shame. It disguises itself as observation. You are simply noticing facts. Your friend bought a home. Your cousin had a second child. A colleague younger than you now manages the department you still work within. These are just details you tell yourself. But underneath the noticing is a verdict, and the verdict is that you are somehow behind a schedule you never actually agreed to. Modern life has turned personal development into a public timeline. Birthdays, anniversaries, promotions, engagements, home purchases, all displayed, all comparable, all measured against a silent consensus of what should have already happened by now. And so comparison becomes a kind of quiet interrogation you run against yourself daily. It does not ask whether your life is meaningful. It asks whether your life is on schedule. Comparison makes another person's timing feel like evidence against your own life. There is a particular kind of embarrassment that comes with starting over publicly. Changing careers in your 30s while people around you are being promoted within theirs. Beginning to date again in your 40s after the life you built quietly ended. Moving back to a childhood bedroom in your late 20s, not because you failed exactly, but because the version of independence you imagined did not survive contact with reality. Each of these moments carries a private fear that there was a correct age for this transition, and you have missed it. That life has a schedule, and you are now permanently out of step with it. This is worth sitting with, because it is not really about the achievement itself. It is about what the achievement seems to prove. If someone else has arrived somewhere, and you have not, some part of you concludes that they must have been more capable, more deserving, more correct in how they lived. And so the comparison does not just produce envy. It produces self-doubt disguised as arithmetic. But timing, in the way we usually measure it, tells us almost nothing about the psychological condition underneath it. It tells us when something became visible. It says nothing about whether the person receiving it was actually equipped to keep it. Which brings us to something almost nobody talks about. Achieving something and being ready for it are not the same event. Someone can receive love before they have learned where their boundaries begin and end. The relationship becomes a place where they slowly disappear. Someone can receive money before they have developed the self-control to hold it. It becomes a fire that burns through their hands. Someone can receive recognition before they have built a stable sense of who they are underneath it. Every compliment becomes both a high and a threat, because losing the admiration would feel like losing the self. Someone can enter a relationship before they understand projection, mistaking the intensity of their own longing for genuine compatibility. Years later, they wonder why the same painful pattern kept finding them in a different face. Someone can gain influence before they have confronted the parts of themselves they would rather not look at. The power becomes a stage on which their least examined instincts perform in public. In Jungian psychology, there is a useful way of understanding what happens in these situations. Early success often reinforces the persona rather than developing the self. The persona is the mask we build to be acceptable, to be seen favorably, to function socially. It is not false exactly, but it is partial. It is the version of us designed for an audience. And when success arrives before the deeper work of individuation has taken place, that success tends to strengthen the mask instead of strengthening the person wearing it. Some things arrive early and become prisons because the person receiving them has not yet become free. This is not a punishment. It is simply how psychological development works. A structure that has not been reinforced cannot hold the weight placed upon it, no matter how much the person wanted that weight, no matter how long they prayed for it. Which leads to a distinction that most people have never been taught to make. The difference between desire and readiness. Wanting something is largely an act of imagination. You picture how it will feel to have it, the relief of finally arriving, the sense that your life will make sense once this piece falls into place. Readiness is a different category entirely. It is the emotional structure required to actually live inside what you wanted. Not just the arrival, but everything that comes after it. The responsibilities, the uncertainty, the pressure, the unglamorous consequences that never make it into the fantasy. Someone can want intimacy while still being terrified of the vulnerability intimacy requires. Someone can want success while remaining privately dependent on the approval of people who may never fully give it. Someone can want freedom while quietly avoiding the responsibility that freedom demands. Someone can want to be seen while still being governed by a fear of judgment that makes visibility unbearable. Someone can want an entirely new life while remaining psychologically organized around defending the old one. You can want a new life while still being psychologically organized around the old one. This is not hypocrisy. It is simply the lag between conscious desire and unconscious structure. The mind can want something faster than the personality can absorb it. And so the gap between wanting and having is sometimes not bad luck. It is the time required for the inner structure to catch up to the outer wish. Picture someone who spends years wanting a relationship. She finally finds one, in her late 20s, and for a while it feels like proof that she was right to wait, but she has never learned to exist inside closeness without disappearing into it. She agrees when she means no. She apologizes for needs she has not even stated yet. Slowly, without either of them deciding it, she becomes smaller, easier, quieter, until there is very little of her left in the relationship to actually love. When it ends, she assumes the lesson is that she simply has not found the right person yet. It takes years and a great deal of solitude before she understands the lesson differently. She did not need to find someone. She needed to stop vanishing inside whoever she found. Much of that gap is shaped by something Jung called the persona, and it deserves closer attention here, because it explains why so many people feel late for a life that was never actually theirs to begin with. From very early on, we absorb expectations about what a life is supposed to look like. When you are supposed to marry, when you are supposed to know your career, when you are supposed to own a home, have savings, understand your purpose, look settled, look accomplished, look like someone worth respecting. These expectations rarely arrive as direct instructions. They arrive as atmosphere, family conversations, cultural messaging, the quiet comparison of relatives at holidays, and slowly, almost invisibly, a borrowed timeline replaces a chosen one. Many people are not grieving their actual life. They are grieving the failure to meet a timeline they never consciously chose. This is worth pausing on, because it changes the entire emotional weight of feeling late. If the timeline was never truly yours, then failing to meet it is not really evidence of personal failure. It is evidence that you are measuring your life against a script written by someone else's expectations, someone else's fears, someone else's definition of a life worth respecting. Are you actually late, or are you measuring yourself against a life you never consciously chose? This question alone is capable of dissolving years of quiet self-punishment, because it relocates the problem. The problem was never your pace. The problem was the ruler. Now here is where the deeper work becomes visible, even though for years it may have looked like nothing was happening at all. In Jungian psychology, a great deal of meaningful development takes place outside conscious awareness. The unconscious does not announce its progress with milestones. It does not send updates. Its work often looks from the outside exactly like stagnation. Consider what many people have actually been doing during the years they believed they were falling behind. Recovering from patterns formed in childhood that they did not choose and could not have avoided. Learning slowly to regulate emotions that used to control them entirely. Leaving relationships that were quietly harmful, even when leaving cost them comfort and familiarity. Confronting a dependence on external validation that had been mistaken for years as simply who they were. Learning to metabolize anger instead of suppressing it or being ruled by it. Discovering values that were actually their own rather than values inherited and never examined. Becoming, slowly, less afraid of solitude. Learning, often through painful trial, to tell the difference between intuition and fear, which from the inside can feel almost identical. None of this produces a promotion. None of this produces a wedding. None of this appears on anyone's timeline. But from a depth psychology perspective, it may be the exact structural preparation required before anything visible could be sustained. The years that produced no visible achievement may have produced the person capable of surviving one. It would be dishonest, however, to suggest that every delay carries this kind of hidden meaning. Some delays are simply the result of fear. Some are the result of avoidance. Some come from trauma that has not yet been addressed. Some are the result of circumstances that were genuinely unfair, opportunities that never appeared, doors that were closed by forces entirely outside anyone's control. Not every slow path is secretly wise. Some slowness is just suffering without direction, and it deserves to be named honestly rather than romanticized. But it is also true that psychological maturation does not move at the same pace in every person. And there are real reasons some people need longer. Some had to build their earliest identity around survival rather than authenticity, the self they later needed to become, had to be excavated rather than simply expressed. Some had to separate, often at great personal cost, from family expectations that had quietly defined their worth since childhood. Some spent years performing a version of themselves designed to be acceptable and unlearning that performance takes far longer than learning it did. Some had to recognize the extent to which they had been projecting old wounds onto new people, mistaking recognition for love. Some had to reclaim parts of their personality they had disowned long ago because those parts once made them unsafe. And some simply had to learn, slowly and painfully, that being needed by others is not the same as being loved by them. None of this makes the slower path superior. It simply means the slower path may have involved a different, and often heavier, category of inner work. And this is where the shadow becomes relevant, because the shadow can quietly sabotage the very things a person consciously insists they want. The shadow, in Jungian terms, refers to the parts of the personality that have been rejected, hidden, or disowned, often because they were unacceptable within the environment a person grew up in. The shadow does not disappear simply because it goes unacknowledged. It continues to operate, often working directly against the conscious will. Consider how this shows up. A fear of success disguised as simple bad luck, a resentment of responsibility disguised as principled detachment, envy disguised as sharp, articulate criticism of people who succeeded, self-sabotage that arrives disguised as sudden, uncharacteristic carelessness right before something important, a pattern of choosing emotionally unavailable partners, followed by genuine confusion about why intimacy never seems to arrive. Opportunities abandoned the moment they become real, as though closeness to the goal itself becomes unbearable. A tendency to shrink the moment attention arrives, as if being seen were more dangerous than being overlooked. A habit of creating chaos at the exact moment life becomes calm, because chaos, however painful, is at least familiar. Sometimes the door was not closed. Part of you was standing behind it, holding it shut. It can be strange to consider that the same person who spends years wanting something might also be the one preventing it. But the psyche is not a single unified voice. It is closer to a household of competing interests, some conscious, many not. The part of you that longs for intimacy may share space with a part that once learned intimacy leads to abandonment. The part of you that wants recognition may share space with a part that once learned visibility leads to punishment. These parts do not disappear simply because they are inconvenient. They wait and they act, usually at the exact moment their conditions for danger seem to reappear. This is not a moral failing. It is an unintegrated part of the self attempting to protect a person from something it perceives, often based on old evidence, as dangerous. The work of individuation includes bringing these disowned parts into conscious relationship, not to eliminate them, but to stop being unconsciously ruled by them. Which brings us to the hardest section of this story, the years when nothing seems to move at all. This period often involves repeated endings, relationships that do not last, jobs that do not become careers, plans that dissolve before they take shape. It often involves loneliness that has no clear cause and no clear solution. Career uncertainty that stretches on long enough to feel like a permanent condition, rather than a phase. A loss of identity, especially after leaving something that once defined you. It can look like invisibility, moving through the world without being fully seen by anyone. The strange humiliation of starting over in your 30s or 40s, what others started in their 20s. watching people move steadily ahead while your own life circles the same unresolved terrain, doing quiet, unrewarded work that no one applauds and no one even notices. This period, if survived with any degree of honesty, tends to develop capacities that cannot be built any other way. Patience that is no longer performative. Discernment sharpened by having been wrong before. Boundaries built not from theory but from consequence. Humility that comes from having genuinely failed. A tolerance for uncertainty that no longer requires constant reassurance. And a depth of self-knowledge that could not have been reached through comfort alone. It is important not to romanticize this. Suffering by itself does not produce growth. Many people suffer for years and emerge no wiser, only more guarded, more exhausted, more convinced that life is simply cruel. The difference is not the suffering. The difference is what a person is willing to understand while inside it. Time does not automatically mature you. What you are willing to understand during that time does. This is the quiet distinction between someone who has simply endured a difficult decade and someone who has been transformed by one. The years alone prove nothing. The reflection inside those years is what matters. So how would someone actually know if this kind of readiness has begun to arrive? It rarely announces itself the way people expect. It often looks like no longer chasing every opportunity that appears, because not every opportunity is actually meant for you. It looks like saying no without over-explaining the reason, because your decisions no longer require unanimous approval to feel valid. It looks like a growing disinterest in emotional chaos, the kind that once felt like passion and now simply feels exhausting. It looks like no longer confusing intensity with love, and recognizing that calm can also be intimacy, not its absence. It looks like receiving praise without needing it to continue in order to feel stable. It looks like tolerating slow, unglamorous progress without needing constant proof that it is working. It looks like holding success without requiring everyone around you to approve of it first. And it looks like leaving something that diminishes you even when leaving is lonely, because you have started trusting your own perception more than you trust how things appear from the outside. Readiness often feels quieter than ambition. It rarely feels like triumph. More often it feels like a kind of settledness that was not there before. Readiness does not always feel like confidence. Sometimes it feels like no longer being willing to abandon yourself. This reframes the title of this video. Your time has arrived does not mean success is now guaranteed, or that the world has suddenly decided to reward you. It means something more specific. It means you may now possess capacities you did not have before. You may recognize genuine opportunity instead of chasing whatever looks urgent. You may be less likely to sabotage what you finally receive. You may choose from self-respect rather than fear. And you may finally be able to sustain something that years ago would have overwhelmed you. Your time arriving is not the world finally choosing you. It is you becoming able to choose differently. But this understanding carries a responsibility that cannot be avoided, because readiness that is never acted upon quietly curdles into a new form of avoidance. If you have done the inner work, at some point it has to meet the outer world. That may mean applying for the thing you have talked yourself out of applying for. It may mean leaving something that has already run its course. It may mean beginning without the certainty you have been waiting for, because certainty was never going to arrive first. It may mean speaking honestly in a conversation you have postponed for years. It may mean setting a boundary you have rehearsed privately, but never stated aloud. It may mean tolerating the discomfort of being a beginner again, publicly, at an age when you feel you should already know. Confidence, more often than not, is built by action, not granted before it. Preparation becomes avoidance when you use it as a reason never to enter your own life. This is the balance the entire video has been building toward. Patience without responsibility becomes paralysis disguised as depth. Responsibility without patience becomes repetition of the same premature attempts that failed before. What is required is both: the willingness to have waited honestly and the willingness to now act deliberately. So let's return to where we began, to the discomfort of feeling late. Maybe you did lose time in some ways. Maybe fear delayed you longer than it needed to. Maybe circumstances outside your control cost you years you can never fully recover. These things can be true, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. But none of it disqualifies you. What matters now is not the length of the delay. What matters is what the delay produced in you. Perhaps you did not arrive when you expected. Perhaps the life you imagined at 20 did not appear at 30, or even at 40. Perhaps you watched doors open easily for other people while yours remained shut for reasons you still do not fully understand. But you are not standing here empty-handed. You are carrying discernment you did not have before, boundaries you were once unable to hold, grief that has quietly matured you, self-knowledge that could only have come from the years you spent believing nothing was happening, a capacity to remain, to sustain, to hold, that simply did not exist in the earlier version of you who first wanted this life. Your time has not arrived because life suddenly owes you something. It has arrived because you may finally be ready to stop abandoning what is trying to begin. The delay, uneven and imperfect as it was, built the person capable of finally staying. If this helped you see your timeline differently, subscribe for more explorations into Carl Jung, individuation, and depth psychology.